And I'm live with Jeff. This webcam looks like it's from about 2007, but we're going to be doing this episode written by Yaphet Kotto, the guy that plays G. Over to Jeff.
Okay, yeah, it's season 5, episode 20, which is called Narcissus. I don't like saying that word, actually, so that's the only time I'm going to say it.
Right.
As been mentioned, it was written by Yaphet Kotto and directed by Jean de Segonza. And originally aired May 2nd, 1997. So we're still in the May sweeps. And go to what David B226 Morris has to say on TV.com. After a series has been on the air for long enough, it is common for actors on the show to step behind the camera. Clark Johnson and Kyle Secor have already done so this season. It is much rarer, though, that an actor will write an episode of a series. Indeed, I only know of 2 series where this has happened, The X-Files and Homicide. In this latter case, Yaphet Kotto would be the only actor to do so, and he would do it 3 times, starting with Narcissus. The episode that Kotto delivers is a thought-provoking one for many reasons. The first is that it deals with tricky racial issues. Despite the fact that a third of the leads, half the regulars, and a goodly amount of the guest cast was black, Homicide did not often show episodes involving racial strife, which is especially ironic considering how many murders are caused for that very reason. Here, Kotto delves into it deeply by having the episode center around a black organization called the African Revival Movement. Headed by an ex-Baltimore police calling himself Burundi Robinson, members draw their names from African countries, the movement involves itself with reaching out and trying to help the black community from soup kitchens to finding jobs for the homeless. But there is an ugly side to the movement, as we find out when one of its members is murdered. Talking with a witness, Munch and Pimbleton learn that Robinson has been sleeping with many of the young women in the movement. Because of this, Robinson had him killed. That's kind of bad grammar, but they're saying Robinson had Marchand killed. He didn't say his name in this, but anyway. But there is far more to the case than just the murder. When Frank and Munch show up on the crime scene, Colonel Barnfather is present, threatening to curtail the search for the killer. When the killer, another member of the ARM, is found, Captain Gaffney talks to him, after which he refuses to talk to the police. Later, he files up a wiretap on Robinson by demanding the name of the witness. These scenes show some stunning insights into Barnfather and Gaffney. We know from past events that Barnfather is a manipulative and political animal, but here he reveals he has a conscience. Arriving at the crime scene, he allows Pimbleton to quote procedure on him and stop him from blowing rank. For the first time on the show, he draws a line in the sand as to what he thinks is right. Gaffney, on the other hand, reveals what a cruel and mercenary bastard he is. Not only does he pull rank on G repeatedly, he bullies Ed Danvers, and near the episode's climax is willing to go over Barnfather's head. This is the first time we have seen all the brass not on the same side, and we realize that even though they don't show it often, sometimes the high-ranking officers have consciences of their own. Frustrated by this, Giardello comes up with a brilliant idea as to make the killer talk. He, Pimbleton, and Munch call the murderer into the box and then have a conversation about the case as if he isn't there. After revealing some brutal truths, they spook the murderer into giving Robinson up. But when they try to arrest Robinson, he barricades himself in the ARM headquarters, and it is only through Frank's actions that a riot doesn't break out. Realizing the potential for a massacre, G goes in the building without a gun and asks to talk to Robinson. And here we have one of the most shocking revelations that the series would do, period. The man who has been manipulating the brass to protect Robinson is none other than Deputy Commissioner Harris. Turns out Harris and Robinson were partners 25 years ago, and after they busted a major dealer, Harris stole those drugs from evidence control and sold them back to the dealer. With both of them on the hook, Harris convinced Robinson to handle damage control. Robinson took the rap for Harris in exchange for the money. From this incredible corruption, Harris has risen to great heights in the Baltimore PD. And now that he has his feet to the fire, Harris has no trouble betraying a case and authorizing QRT to kill his former partner. They never get the chance, though. Giardello tries to convince Robinson to surrender, but the most he does is release all the women and children. Hours pass as the tension mounts. Finally, QRT and the squad storm the building. In the basement, they find Robinson and 15 of his followers dead in a mini Jonestown. However, the most stunning element is the denouement. G can rage all he wants about bringing down Harris, but in the end, the average American watching at home doesn't give a damn about black people killing each other. A couple is shown watching the news unfold on television. They look at it dispassionately and change channels, utterly uninterested. We never learn if this ever goes any further than this episode, but after this, Harris was written out of the series. Small justice for those involved. I guess I accidentally read a spoiler there that he's not going to show up.
Yeah, but just a little bit of a spoiler there, Joe. Thank you.
Sorry, I wasn't thinking as I was reading that, but anyway, Kodo clearly demonstrates in this episode that he has the rhythm of Homicide down cold. Issues such as the Mahoney shooting and Bayless's absence from the squad are dealt with briefly but in style. Stivers is having trouble coming to grips with the murder of Mahoney. She hasn't been sleeping or eating. Kellerman, however, has no problem with it. Kodo also shakes things up by having Frank tell a bizarre news story that Munch is known for telling occasionally. More than that, he demonstrates that he understands the hierarchy of the PD. Ultimately, it plays like a typical episode, which is what he was aiming for. The sequence between Robinson and Giardello is the most unrealistic, but Kodo and Roger Robinson, playing Burundi, make it work very well, particularly in their last exchanges when Burundi bets his final action on the flip of an imaginary coin and then tells him, "You lose." Watching it still sends chills down my spine. The one flaw of the show comes by the fact that, again, half the cast is ignored. Kyle Secor, Clark Johnson, and Melissa Leo are given nothing to do. Still, Narcissus is a fascinating story that shows a lot of different twists on characters that we would not expect. It also asks the question about what role the black man really has in society. Put another way, is G a black man who's a cop or a cop who happens to be black? For him, the former seems to be true. For Frank, the latter seems more irrelevant. As for someone like Harris, he doesn't seem to be either. Sometimes power means you lose parts of yourself, and in Harris's case, he gave up everything. My score, 8.7. I give his review about a 3, but anyway, your turn.
I think for a Homicide episode, I'll give it a 10 out of 10.
Oh, wow.
Remember, folks, that's for a Homicide episode because.
As I said before, you don't have to qualify it.
I do for myself though. Because the plot was very good. It's like when I was talking before that I like things with an edge. I like things that have a little bit more corruption to them. Because I like that, and you actually had that in this episode. I like the stuff with yeah, I like the J. Edgar Hoover parallel when he talked about that. You know, when G talked about the civil rights movement being bugged, and he wasn't happy with initially with bugging him with The Wire, and of course we had a preview of The Wire, didn't we? Although it wasn't written by David Simon. Oh yeah, and then when he initially said whoring, I was thinking, what was he acting as like a pimp or something? What did he mean, like whoring?
Yeah, that's what it was, I think. He was saying to the female members he was having them work as prostitutes. Yeah.
Oh, but you see, the thing is, that word, and like I said, the way David made David beat, the word was sort of at odds with the context, because usually what happens in these cults, where usually whenever they do a cult, and I've seen it 2 or 3 times, where the cult leader ends up having a load of children with the female members.
Yeah, I mean, they sort of implied that there could be something like that going on, but it's never specifically stated. The witness didn't actually say that. It was in the scene where they had the suspect in there and they're all talking. One of the things they did to push his buttons was suggest that, his girlfriend his baby might belong to Burundi, but and it may have been true based on his reaction, but it might not have been either. So
but he also said there's a lot of kids in the streets that are his offspring.
yeah,
But what I sort of, so I thought that bit was actually quite clear, but it's when they used the term whoring. But maybe that was a word that was the way the word was used, when did they just used to use that as a word for a man who just slept with a lot of women? They would just say whoring.
no, I don't think so. I think that he would have said something different for that. I think he meant he was actually having them work as prostitutes to earn money for himself. But it sort of implied that he, basically if someone, it's not every pimp, I guess, but it's implied that, a pimp, if he has prostitutes working for him and he wants to have sex with any of them, then he can, because he's like their boss. So
it would explain where he gets the money from for the organization.
Yeah, I mean, that was what was implied, is that, what the witness actually said was that basically he wanted to make more money, and that's what he did.
Yeah, so
that some of the people were not happy about that, obviously.
Yeah, so they could have added that. He could have just said, well, where do you think the money comes from to fund this organization? Right.
Yeah, which obviously that's a recurring theme on Homicide as well, is that there's a lot of black and white. I mean, there are a lot of gray as opposed to black and white when it comes to a lot of these organizations and things that exist. That there are positive things being done by some organizations, but there's corruption in most of them, is kind of the implication.
I mean, I remember saying that I like the other one. You remember the other organization one where they had the Muslims in the housing project? And
right. Yeah, sometimes I actually mix those episodes up, because when I was thinking about this one, for some reason I had been thinking that Lewis was involved, and he really wasn't. So I had remembered it wrong. I actually enjoyed it more this time than I have in the past. This is not one of my favorite episodes, even though I don't think it's badly written. I don't fault Yaphet Kotto. I just think that, after the excitement of the last one, and excitement that was related mostly to stuff that had really led up to that, this one seemed a little bit of a letdown to me when I first saw it. So that's kind of my view. But
I liked it because of the backstory of
Mr. Morris. If you go by his implication, maybe it's just because I'm white and I don't care about the black organization. But to me, there wasn't anything that compelling about them. I mean, it's like random. It's like organization with corrupt leader. Like, he was saying something about covering racial strife, but I disagree with that review. That's kind of why I gave the review bad score. They have covered racial stuff before, and much better than this, because really this wasn't much about race at all. It was only brought up, but it was brought up tangentially. It really didn't have to do with the main crux of the story. This could have been a white group, and the plot would have been exactly the same.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't even the scenes where they have, the people throwing stuff at the cops and those confrontations. Yes, there is sort of an added tension because of that kind of, there's this distrust of the cops by black people. You could say that element wouldn't have been there as much, at the time when Morgan and I were rewatching this. We've been watching In the Heat of the Night also lately, and I said, he said something about the cops should be able to just shoot whoever. And I said, well, if this took place in Sparta, Mississippi, in the heat of the night, then they probably would have shot whoever they wanted to in that scene. So that would have been, I'm like, in Baltimore, that's not going to happen. But then in Sparta, Mississippi, there was also no African revival movement. So you can't really, just move it to a place where the same thing wouldn't have happened. But what I mean is, it's like the racial aspects were almost downplayed. It was like they were only a subject because they were mentioned to be a subject. But as far as the actual things that took place, it wasn't really as much of the issue as it was random corrupt leader of some group, and somebody who has somebody in the department high up owes him. So you have this kind of other story going on of the police involvement in covering things up or cooperating with somebody who's a criminal.
Right. So, some of these people on the wall, are they? Do you recognise any of them? I don't know how.
No, not really.
Okay, and then.
I didn't sign up for a quiz.
Okay. Oh, I wonder if that could be that Douglas guy. I don't know.
Frederick Douglass?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably so.
Right. Interesting. They call themselves the African Revival Movement, but it also spells out arm.
Then we had the little stage scene with the reporter where they have the guy come up and tell him how he got a job.
Yeah.
He went for a job interview.
Oh, and then we got the. Is this the real D?
Yes. Gary Diodario.
Yeah, I thought it was a good performance by the guy playing Plug.
Barnfather?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that part I agreed with Mr. Morris about, like, it was the first time we really saw much of him kind of showing a little bit more of his personal feelings than just echoing what he thought was the politically appropriate thing to do. And you could tell it was tearing him up some, having divided loyalties.
Yeah. Right, and then we'll talk a bit about Kellerman.
That was Morgan's favorite part, when they busted through the windows.
Yeah, thought so. Well, I didn't think so, but you know, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Was he also happy at this bit as well when they found out they all killed themselves?
I wouldn't say he was happy, but he said the QRT guys were not happy. Because he's like, this is not what they come in for.
He got squirrely, and is that all he does? He gets paid for the episode, and all he has to do is hold the camera. Did he actually say anything in this episode?
I think he had a few brief lines earlier in the episode, if I remember right. Maybe when they were talking about whatever story Pembleton was reading in the newspaper.
That was a nice touch with the guy carrying the stuff out, and he's like holding them at arm's length because he's thinking what dangerous cocktail is in here.
Yeah.
Whoa! Right. Oh well.
Yeah, Deutsch actually got quite a bit to do in this episode. Most of his previous episodes, he doesn't have very many lines, but he got to do the initial scene trying to chase the dude and try to bust in on the revival movement, and then he got to go into the place later and identify the suspects. So that was probably the most he's had to do in an episode to this point.
Okay. So what did you think of when he had the stuff with? Is she called Stivers?
Yeah.
Do you think that that was out of character for her to be worrying that much?
That's a good question, because what I would say is that her character is not as established as the others, so it's kind of convenient for them to be able to sort of have her feel whatever they want to have, but you know, she's not as well written as some of the other characters, I have to say. Like, and you know, from when her first appearance was, she sort of came off as like, you know, she was tougher than that.
Yeah.
And then in this, they sort of have her, you know, all broken up about it, whatever. I can't really say it's out of character, because we haven't really had experience enough with her to know how she handled similar things before. You know, she's a narcotics cop, so she obviously doesn't deal with death as much as homicide, in terms of that's not, you know, her job isn't to solve murders, but at the same time, she certainly has encountered plenty of death, I'm sure, in her job. Because when, you know, talking about drugs, you end up, you know, with a lot of people dead when you got drug wars going on and stuff. So she's obviously not new to that kind of thing happening. But as far as how many times she's had to fire her weapon, or how many times she's, you know, been with somebody else, they never talk about, you know, a partner, anything for her. So apparently she works alone, at least when it comes to in conjunction with homicide. So, you know, you don't really get. You can't really say that it's out of character for her, but you can't really say it's consistent either, because there's just not enough past evidence of her temperament to really have a view one way or the other on that.
Also, I think her acting wasn't quite as good in that moment as it's been before. So maybe the actress herself didn't quite.
Yeah, well, she may not have been down with that particular plot development herself. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe she thought she was a little bit tougher, a little bit more.
And that's a common complaint of female actors.
Actors.
That they're not allowed to. Ones like they're always sort of whatever they like and not dumbed down, but like effed down.
Yeah.
They're made to be more emotional because they're female.
Yeah, a little bit more. Oh yeah, what else? What else? I was actually okay with the guy. What's he called?
You're gonna have to give me more than that.
I think he called him a bastard, but I thought he was like
Gaffney?
Yeah, but I just thought it was like pretty much consistent to himself as to what he would do.
Yeah, he was. And I thought it was a good performance by him, and especially like the confrontation with him and G, because you know he was scared when G gets up and gets in his face like that. But at the same time, he still held firm to what he was saying to him. So I thought that was well done. I thought those confrontations were some of the best things in this episode, actually.
The only thing I could say is that this hangout started rather late, and I've written something here. This is for the MBTI people out there. Jeff thinks he is a 100% MBTI perceiver, but I still need him to give me a 6-hour start, because like I do have this like 6-hour advantage on him, and I still end up being late for stuff. So just let you know that. Right then. Yeah, one of the things he criticized the episode for was because it didn't feature all the people in it. I'm like, well, that doesn't have to be a criterion.
Well, I agree in one sense. You can have a good episode without necessarily featuring all the characters. But if you're going to focus on only a few characters, then they better be interesting. And my complaint about this episode is that the non-regular characters featured in this episode are not that interesting. Burundi Robinson, the witness, the suspect, none of these people are really that interesting. And it's not a black and white thing for anybody who wants to accuse me of that. We've had plenty of interesting black people in the past on this show.
Just two favourite characters of black folks.
Right. I mean, and we've had plenty of good guest characters that were black, that were interesting characters that really added something. The most interesting of the characters in this story isn't actually in it, and that's Harris. We never actually get an appearance by Harris, which I think would have made this better, maybe because he's a lot better character than Robinson. And I'm not even saying, I mean, maybe a better actor too, but I'm not even criticizing his acting. I would say the weakness in Yaphet Kotto's writing is he didn't make Burundi Robinson that interesting a character, to me. I mean, maybe for some people he is, I don't know. But to me, like I said, he was very generic. He could have been lots of people. So
yeah, generic cult leader.
We've had probably if I just came upon this and had never seen Homicide before, I would probably say this was pretty good. It would actually compel me to watch it maybe more. But because I've seen Homicide be so much better before, this feels like a little bit of a letdown. And it doesn't mean it's not some huge thing. Again, I've said before, I don't think there's such thing as a bad episode of Homicide. It's not bad. It's just not. It doesn't have the punch, the oomph. They tried to. They have these action scenes. They have people busting through windows, and they try to sort of ramp up. We start with a car chase, and so it's not that. To me, it shows that Homicide, when you have action scenes, it's better when there's something behind it. When it's not just sort of like, okay, enjoy this because it's action. Like it's just going to be exciting because people are running around doing stuff. But that's not exciting in and of itself to me. There has to be something more to it. And when you break down this episode for what actually happens and what's, there are some revelations, but there's also a lot of stuff that really just kind of generic. So I sort of feel like, that yes, they could have featured other characters more, but if you focus on a few characters, that's fine as long as that is interesting. Like Freeman and Adina, when it's basically Bayless, Pimbleton, and the Araber, and through the whole episode, it's still the best episode, even with only a couple of characters. And so, again, you can do that, but you have to make the people that are featured really compelling.
Would it have been better for you if they'd have done like the person that they got to talk about, and maybe they'd have played up this aspect of the women and the children aspect, and maybe played up that angle? Do you think it would have been more interesting that way?
That's one way they could have done it. Like there's very little like emotional resonance in this. Like we're supposed to sort of feel for the guy or G in the situation, but it's like, especially after the last couple episodes where there was really like powerful stuff in there. Double Blind had all the stuff with the abuse case as well as Thorman and the Charlie Flavin and all that stuff. Like you had a really emotionally powerful episode there, and the next one you had sort of all the emotions going into like trying to finally nail Mahoney and the aftermath of what happens with that. And there probably was naturally going to be a little of a letdown with this, but I almost would have thought maybe you do a more comedic episode in that situation, maybe to sort of ease a little of the tension, as opposed to like sort of this kind of forced tension they had in this one. So, again, as Mr. Morris said, this wasn't, Yaphet Kotto would write more episodes than this. And off the top of my head, I don't remember the other ones, and that's probably good because I'm not judging based on that. But if I just based on this one, I would say, he needs a little more work in his writing. But again, the other part is I don't know how much is him and how much was the producers and the story editors, because they do, whatever his original script was, they probably did mess with it some into what the final form was. And, they had to work in certain things from past episodes. I remember actually when I saw this again that I was surprised not to see that Kyle Secor was the director, because he's only barely appears in the episode. So maybe he just maybe he was doing a play or something on the weekend and had to go. I don't know, because he has like almost no part in this.
Hey, they could have put that in as a joke. Hey, what have you been doing?
Yeah, they just mentioned he had an errand. But of course, obviously, from what happened in the previous episode, we're just made to assume that he's off tending to his uncle again. Even though they don't say that specifically in the episode.
I mean, although they were, we're even more in the internet era now than they were then. But I wonder if they do stuff like that now, where they say, "What were you doing? You away doing a play in the evening or something?" Because like,
I'm sure. I mean, there's shows have plenty of in jokes all the time, and Homicide was no exception.
And of course now go on.
There's definitely some about Brody when it comes to both the fact that he was somewhat based on David Simon, so some of the things that they have him say or do, or the cops say to him, were things that people really said to David Simon, but also in terms of what happens with the actor outside the show. Well, anyway, I'll just say that there's more to come in that. But anyway.
I'm intrigued. So, how many episodes are left in this season?
Just 2.
Ooh.
Did you have anything more to say about this one, or you want to go straight to our ratings?
No, there's not much to say. Acting was very good again from Yaphet Kotto. I suggest people watch Live and Let Die. He's a good. He plays a good Bond villain in that one.
Well, are you sticking with 10? Is that your final answer? I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but you did say 10 out of 10 earlier. So.
I'm giving it 10 for a Homicide episode.
Well, they're all Homicide episodes. That's what we're reviewing here.
I'm not giving it 10 out of 10 for itself.
Okay, so Ben gives it a 10.
For a Homicide episode. It's just like, say you were having a biscuit. And
okay, but there's no reason to say that unless you give it another rating for something else. Unless you say, but overall it's whatever. You can't just say, I mean, you can. I can't force you not to do that, but otherwise that's kind of a useless thing to say. You see what I'm saying?
Well, not for me, because people know that, like, crime, that this series is not, like, my main thing, whereas for you...
Well, that's what I mean. That's why you don't have to say that, because it's already understood.
Yeah, but I sort of like... It's like... For you, I think is this your favourite show, Jeff?
I have about 4 or 5 shows. It's hard for me to pick one of those.
Is this one of your favourite shows? When your
it's
joint?
One of my favorites, yes.
Right. So, when you give, say something like 7 out of 10 for this show, and then there's somebody else who's watching it and say it's a show that they've watched on and off, and then they might give it, say, 7 out of 10. But it's like because then they'll say, yeah, that's 7 out of 10 for a Homicide. Is that kind of?
But I don't do it that way.
I know you do overall enjoyment value.
I understand what you're saying. I'm not telling you I don't understand what you're saying. I'm saying it's not necessary to say that unless you're going to say it's 10 for a Homicide, but overall I give it a 6. Like if you said that, then there would be some reason to say that.
Oh, okay. I'll try and then give it an objective, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to be fair to them by saying that,
Well, don't. Stop being fair. Just say what you think.
Right, for Homicide. Okay, so overall enjoyment value. Okay. Right now, this is tricky. So I can compare this. So, for instance, I was listening to. So this is what I can compare it to in terms of overall enjoyment value. A day or so ago, I was listening to the first half of the miniseries with Haley, Battlestar Galactica. And this is something that I've watched 2 or 3 times before. So when it was first on, about three times before. And I was just listening to it. And I probably enjoyed that more than this.
Okay.
But that's something I very much like. But that's what it's like for you when you're watching this. Is you're watching something again, and that kind of thing. So it's very hard for me to quantify what. But I did like it. So I always do it like that, so that I'm consistent. I always do it as for this homicide episode. But if I was to be objective about it, I suppose
you
I'd give it.
You can't be objective about it because it's not an objective thing unless you're going to start getting down to some sort of acting methods that you're critiquing in the episode or something. But if you're just if it's based on your enjoyment of the episode, then it's not objective.
Right, but okay, what I'll say is remember that there are things in it which are not perfect. So okay, I'll knock it down to a 9 because there are certain different angles that they could have taken to make it more dramatically interesting, such as things with the women and playing up this aspect of the whoring and where they got the money from, but also have an idea of that there's women that really love this guy, so it could have played up that angle more.
Okay, so is 9 your final answer then?
Actually, I might knock it down. Actually, I might knock it down to an 8 now that I'm thinking about the way I would have done it. But more. I'll give it 8.5. I'll give it 8.5.
We're gonna have a 3-hour video. Okay, and I give it a 7, and I actually probably, like I said, the way I do my ratings is I do it by overall enjoyment level, which is mostly the quality of the show, but obviously there can be something that, just like Ben said, I could admit is quality, but I don't enjoy it because it's just not my thing.
Yeah.
But this, I actually sort of probably gave it a 6 when if I had rated it when I watched it before. But I enjoyed it a little more this time than I had previously, so I moved it up to a 7, which is my average score. It's my average score for most shows that I like. I would say that to 7 is a good but not great episode of television to me. And so, but I rate things again the same across the board. So when we were doing Blake 7 reviews, like for instance, I gave the highest rating I gave was an 8 to the episode Countdown. So I'm saying Countdown was better than this was. So Ooh. Because I gave that an 8, I gave this a 7. Meanwhile, Deception, last week's episode, was better than Countdown. It was a 10. So that's the way I look at it. So. Just because, like, the best episodes of Homicide are better than the best episode of Blake 7, but that's not because I'm saying I'm rating it on a different scale. Right. I watched Blake 7 with an open mind, thinking if there's something that came on there that wowed me, where I'm just like, oh, wow, that was a fantastic episode of television, I would have given it a 10, too. There wasn't anything that did that for me. So, anyway, all right, so that is it for this one. Join us next time for... We're heading down the home stretch. We're getting ready to wrap up season 5, and we have some excitement yet to go. So join us next week for some returns of some past characters, as well as some introductions of some new ones.
That'd be a great title. Returns of some past characters and maybe some introductions of some new ones.
It could have called it that, but instead they decided to call it Partners and Other Strangers. So that'll be next week.
And then there is the one after that where it goes the other way around.
Yes, the last episode of the season is called Strangers and Other Partners.
Right, okay.
So, but next week is Partners and Other Strangers.
Right, remember that, Ben. Partners and Other Strangers. Right,
Partners and Other Strangers. Don't reverse it accidentally, because then that's a whole different episode.
Yes. Bye-bye, folks.
Bye.